so good to you.
Thank you very much. I just need to wait for the magical screen to lower itself. If we all pray hard enough, I think it might. Yay! I'm on in my house. So my name is Sofa Gradin, like the furniture, and I'm a PhD student at Queen Mary, University of London, and I'm studying about how anti-capitalist or non-capitalist trade could help, solve the problem of global poverty, or something like that. So I've been studying a lot about what capitalism is, or how you can define it and explain it. So I'm going to try and share some of that wisdom today. But I just have to say, I am a PhD student, so I don't know everything at all. So don't take what I say as some kind of, truth about this topic at all. But I just wanted to share a place to start to think about it, really, because a lot of people talk about capitalism and anti-capitalism without really knowing what it means, and it might seem like quite a big concept at first. Let's see if my PowerPoint presentation is going to work as well.
Can you stand on the other side of the stage where we've lit it?
Yeah. Oh yes, you told me about the light in the box before. How could I forget? Okay. Yay! Okay, cool.
Would you like a seat?
I need another hand. That's okay. All right. So, what's capitalism? Well, I'm going to start by just pointing out first that obviously there are many misconceptions about what capitalism is and what capitalism isn't. For example, one kind of stereotypical misconception is that if we don't have capitalism, then what's the alternative? Right? One common misconception is that the only alternative the only alternative is that we all have to live in the woods, in these kind of tents, and we have to wear no clothes or whatever, clothes like that, and we can't have any technology and all that stuff. But I'm very happy to bring the news to you this evening, ladies and gentlemen and queers, that you can have technology without capitalism. You can have buildings without capitalism. And yes, you can have showers without capitalism. And this is going to make more sense in a minute. Another kind of misconception is that if we don't have capitalism, then the only other option is some kind of dreary form of communism where everyone has to dress the same, look the same, and the government tells you what to do and what job you can have. But I'm also equally happy to tell you that neither freedom nor choice are things that only exist in capitalism. Yes, you can have both freedom and choice without capitalism. Another misconception is that capitalism is money. And people get annoyed when they say, well, money is such a good idea because if we didn't have money, then we'd have to carry around all these ridiculously big bags of stuff to trade for each other, right? Because money's really good because it's like a medium exchange. But I'm sure you can see where this is going. You can indeed have money without capitalism. Money existed long before capitalism, of course, and it can certainly exist without it in the future as well. So, what is capitalism then? Well, a lot of people disagree about this. I mean, people have written, so much about what capitalism is. The obvious first place to start is to look at Karl Marx, the very famous German philosopher. But I just want to point out that whilst I've looked at Karl Marx a lot myself, I've looked at some of these, and more kind of other writers about what capitalism actually is. So don't take this as the single last ever definition of what capitalism is at all. All right. So what is capitalism then? Well, the first thing that you need to know about capitalism, actually, is that capitalism is a mob. In other words, it's a mode of production. That means that capitalism describes relations that have to do with work and how we produce things in our society. So it doesn't describe things about how we dress, whether or not we have a shower, and all of this other stuff I was talking about before, but it describes things that have to do with work and how we organise organisations that produce goods and services in our society. Okay, so then, we've limited down what capitalism actually does for us quite a lot. But even then, some very famous writers called J.K. Gibson Graham, very good writers on this topic, they talk about this iceberg image. And so if you imagine that the work relations that I just said capitalism was, as the iceberg here, they argue that actually only about half of work relations are actually capitalist relations. The other half, that we don't talk about so much, are completely different types of relations, like favours between friends, or women doing unpaid housework in the home, or other people doing unpaid housework in the home. And all of these other relations that cannot be described by capitalism. So what I'm trying to say here is that capitalism is narrowed down quite a lot. So it's not even all of the work relations, but it's roughly half of them, according to research that Jacob Gibson Graham have done. Okay, I'm now going to try to define what capitalist work relations are like in 3 main steps. And just to summarise them, the first one is bourgeois ownership, the second one is profit, and the third one is competition. So I'm going to explain all of these in turn. So bourgeois ownership is basically that you have a distinction in a company between the owners of the means of production and the workers. And means of production is stuff that you can make a profit from, or that you can make money from. Stuff that you can own, that you can make money from. So your toothbrush, or a picture of you as a kid, is not means of production, even if it's property. But means of production might be a factory, or a machine, or something like that you can actually make money from. And what we have in our society, in our capitalist society, is we have certain people who own means of production. They own businesses, they own factory buildings, they own the stuff that factories make, and who kind of make money by owning stuff. Because if you have money, then you can buy a factory, and you don't have to do anything, you just sit there and get money because you own stuff. And then you have the majority of people in society who are workers, who do not, even if they do own a toothbrush if they're lucky, do not own means of production, and therefore the only way that they can survive is by selling their labour power, by working. So we have a division where people are working hard every day and never getting rich because they don't own the means of production. And then we have other people who are who have wealth and who thereby can get even richer because they own the means of production. The second part I talked about was profit. So this is basically just saying that what we measure success by in companies today in capitalism is, not about long-term aims at all. It's not about what's going to happen 50 years from now. It's what's going to happen in this quarter, next quarter, this year, 5 years maybe, if you're lucky. So you're looking at very short-term profit. You're looking at individual kind of interest. You measure the success of a business by how much money that business has gotten. You don't look at how well it's been on a sort of climate scale, for example. You don't look at whether it's helped poor people. You look at how much money it's made for the owners. That's the whole point of having a business. And that's not a necessary thing that we have to have. That's a very capitalist thing. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is about competition between different companies. So imagine you had a Sainsbury's and a Tesco on the same street, for example. What Tesco and Sainsbury's are going to do is they're not going to kind of club together and go, yay, how nice, we're on the same street, let's help each other out and let's get everyone the best services possible. No, they're going to compete against each other because that's how capitalism works. We are encouraged to compete against each other, and every single business in a capitalist market wants to try and be a monopoly. Okay? So we see companies behaving towards each other in a very monopolising way, trying to kill each other off. And that's why we get this kind of homogenization of the market. Like, that's why choice in the cola market, for example, I'm a very big fan of cola myself. You can choose between Coca-Cola or Pepsi, rather than having a whole plethora of different wonderful, beautiful, wonderful colas out there. Because the companies always try to take each other out of business. And, this kind of philosophy of competition obviously spreads to other things more culturally as well, but that's not, strictly speaking, a capitalist thing, because capitalism is, as I said, to do with work relations. I feel like I need another arm here. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I just wanted to give you a summary again, in case you forgot that stuff I said all those minutes ago. I also wanted to say a word about, because I had a go at people with their misconceptions about what capitalism, or a non-capitalist word, could look like. So I just wanted to say as well, just as a finishing thing, what an alternative to capitalism can be, and this is something that I'm focusing on in my PhD as well. So bearing in mind that we want to avoid all of these three key aspects of capitalism, and bearing in mind that capitalism is indeed a mob and not something broader in society, I think that a really exciting place to look for non-capitalist forms of business is the cooperative, or at least the cooperative form. That's not to say that all cooperatives are, by definition, non-capitalist, but it is to say that many cooperatives are quite prone, or they're quite a good place to start. So you can organise without having bourgeois ownership, because cooperatives are businesses where the workers own the business themselves. So you don't have a distinction between the owners who make money from doing nothing and the workers who make very little money from doing everything, but they're actually the same people. You can also have cooperatives that are non-for-profit. Examples include Cafe Pogo, if anyone's been there in Hackney. Yay! 56A. Yeah? Okay, so there are kind of organisations actually doing this. And also, cooperatives can avoid competing with each other by clubbing together and trying to help each other out by sharing resources and not trying to take each other out of business all the time. Anyway, I'm pretty sure that I'm out of time there, but thank you very much. I wanted to leave some time for questions at the end, so if anyone has a question, please either put your hand up or shout, or we'll do something else. Okay, great. So thank you very much, and are there any questions? Good question. Thanks.
I kind of have a question. We're in kind of a period of capitalism at the moment. I've never studied this myself. This is just kind of from conversations here and there, where people are starting. Well, shareholders are a thing now. So there's kind of a blurring of a distinction between workers and bourgeois ownership. I mean, what does that make the society we're living in less capitalist? Because it doesn't really feel that way. And does that tend towards anything?
I think the thing about shareholder ownership, if anything, maybe makes it even more capitalist, because if you think of a traditional example of a capitalist firm, you might have, somebody who's inherited the family business and who owns, a local shop and who employs other people to work in it for them. And that person would often maybe help out as well. I mean, this is kind of like nice traditional capitalist business that we think of when we look back to, I don't know, the pre-war period or something like that. And then you have shareholder. Now, I just want to clarify what shareholders is and how it works. So the way that shareholders works, or shares work, is that you simply buy a percentage of a company. So if you buy a share, you buy a certain percentage of the ownership of a company. And most of us are actually doing this without realising. So for example, if we save in a bank, our money is usually going into shares in a business somewhere, even though the bank is kind of doing it at another level because they're trying to make money off our money at the same time. But or if you're saving money, basically, it's quite probable that it's in shares somewhere, because the best way to make money is to own a part of a business that makes profit. So in that sense, many of us are shareholders without necessarily realising it, or without really seeing any other way of doing it. But does that make it less capitalist? I really don't think so at all, because that really just points out the point of, when you have money, you can just make more money by doing nothing, which is kind of a weird and bizarre idea, but it's become normal in our society. And for me personally, I think it's capitalism that's the radical, out there, extreme view, because if you present it like this, as a model, I'm not sure that many people would buy it now. I think, yeah, that's how we should live. But yeah, it's kind of developed historically, so we think that it's normal now. I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope so a little bit. But let's talk more. I'm going to be sitting sort of over there by the fence, so come and ask me more questions. Does that run another question?
Yeah, well, the shareholder thing. I would say it's just a capitalist because, your worker who saves in a bank, they don't see any real profit from those shares. They see a couple of quid. Their money is working, but they ain't seeing the profit other than, a couple of quid, same as wages works. Whereas the people who take that profit in the same way as the people who take that work as labour, they make millions off it. So it's the same thing through other means.
Absolutely.
We got two more?
I sort of hear stuff on the internet about setting up like resource-based economies, and how could you do something like that as an alternative?
Speaking to the mic.
How could you do something like setting up a resource-based economy?
Would you mind explaining what you mean by resource-based economy a bit more?
Well, sort of economies that aren't so focused on like money which is constantly being like devalued by inflation, that sort of thing, robbing people as they get robbed in the capitalist machine as well, you know, which is something that people tend not to talk about very much.
Definitely, I think that's a really good point. And it brings, I mean, this whole thing about the financial industry and the financial crisis and all of that, people talk about that as being part of capitalism, and you know, in many ways it is. But as I was saying, you know, money itself is not necessarily a capitalist thing. But you kind of have, and that's why people call it the derivatives industry. It's like you have a business and you have a world of businesses and people actually producing goods and services to you know, make things that we need in society. But then off that, there's kind of come up this almost like a gambling industry, gambling about those businesses, gambling money about those businesses. And that's what the financial industry basically is. It's like one big gambling industry. So people will, for example, you will make a contract with somebody that says, okay, so if you're a business making oil, for example, you can't produce all of the oil that people need right now. So you'll start putting people in a queue, like saying, okay, I'll deliver this oil to you now, and then this to you later, and then this to you later, or something like that. So you'll start writing contracts in the future called futures. You'll write like a contract that not now, but 6 months from now, I'll sell you this amount of oil for this amount of money. Well, the whole derivative sort of financial industry has grown up around those future contracts, gambling on what the oil price is going to be like in 6 months from now. Is it going to be higher or is it going to be lower? And you know, so you buy up those contracts now, and then you sell them to people then when the time comes round. So that's just one example of how the financial industry is like this whole kind of other growth onto the capitalist system that is much more similar to a gambling system, like a lottery or a gambling system, than it is to capitalism necessarily. So one thing you could do is to regulate, basically, and that's another question about how do you actually make these changes happen practically. And one way is for the government to regulate and say, no, it's not allowed to do this, it's not allowed to have this gambling industry. And the government could also, you know, regulate about how companies could work and things like that. Another way that I'm looking at in my research is just trying to start alternatives, basically trying to start cooperatives that are not for profit and, you know, that work together with other cooperatives to avoid this kind of ruthless competition. Yeah, so I think that's how it would work in my head anyway. Is that you start kind of trying to introduce some changes, and then the way that you make the whole world a more resource-based industry, I guess, is to kind of just do that.
I just wanted to ask a bit about how we go about starting things. That a lot of things like communitarianism, like Marxism, are founded on the fact that it needs a lot of people to be very organised at the same time, whereas capitalism is just, hey, you go buy this thing, and then it's sorted. Does every solution? Because I think what you're saying is that, am I right in saying that what you're saying is that more production needs to be in the hands of ordinary people? Is that something that you think can happen slowly individually, or does it need to be a big change?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do you make the revolution happen, or something like that? And what is the revolution, if you want to talk in those terms? I'm not saying that you use that term, but that's something that I would use. So yeah, I've been reading a lot about that as well. And there's a big debate. Something that I'm particularly interested in is something called prefigurative politics, which is this idea that on the one hand, you try to create change by protesting, by using direct action, by, you know, breaking into places and breaking stuff, or standing and shouting, or writing letters and all this stuff that grabs people's attention and try to educate other people about it. And at the same time, creating alternatives that don't have to be large scale, but they have to be some form of example, you know, to show people that it's possible. So, and so there's been the traditional and, you know, people will have completely different ideas about what a revolution is or how social change comes about, of course. But there is this kind of more militarized version of it, maybe, that you will gather enough people and you will have some kind of very, very large-scale protest that will bring about change very, very quickly. But I'm personally more drawn to, and by the way, there are many other understandings of revolution as well, but I'm personally more drawn to this prefigurative idea of revolution, where you can think of revolution, and I know that term is very kind of icky, but you can think of that moment as a kind of a moment that happens over and over and over again, where you kind of resist to take part in structures and behaviours that you resent and that you don't want to be part of. So you refuse to take a job in a capitalist company, for example, or you refuse to bank with a capitalist bank, or you refuse to act in a racist way to people and things like that. And that is very focused on you, and that's quite a small way of looking at the world, but I think that, in combination with doing more traditional, very loud, open stuff as well, is a really good kind of way of doing it. This is based on, if anyone wants to read more about it, there's a guy called Andrew Cornell, who's written a book called Oppose and Propose. Came out in 2010, I think, which talks about exactly this. It's a very, very good book. And yeah, the clue's in the name. It's like oppose something and propose things at the same time.
Do you have any more questions? Yeah. I guess I'm quite interested in having more inspiration about alternatives. Just on a personal basis, I've been involved in a few collectives a while back, and it was painful. Just the way that personalities can dominate, and that structure can be quite difficult to make work. So I'd like to know more learning about what hasn't gone right and what we can do better. And yeah, to be inspired. So have you got any suggestions of where to look? What works well where?
Yeah, so again I would point to the book Oppose and Propose by Andrew Cornell, he writes about one particular case study called Movement for a New Society, which was a very big activist group in the US in the 1970s and 80s. That's a really, really, really good book. But also there's a network of cooperatives in Britain called Radical Roots, and Roots is spelled like R-O-U-T-E-S. And they offer training and workshops and discussion groups, and they have meetings every quarter somewhere in the UK. And they're basically a group of different radical, they call themselves, I think you can call them anti-capitalist cooperatives, 50 or so all over Britain, who try to do exactly what I was talking about, not compete against each other, but rather try to pool their resources together, try to help each other and help each other grow, really. And they share money as well. So, and if you want to start a non-capitalist cooperative, you can go to Radical Roots and ask for a really good loan, a very favourable rate. So they're a really good organisation. They're just so incredibly good at what they do, and they do really good training about how to make cooperatives work. There's also another organisation, the name of which has completely escaped me now, but I'll try and remember it before I leave.
Any more questions? Oh, hello.
Not a question, just a comment on the last person. There's a book by Starhawk about collaborative groups and dealing with conflicts and things. And then also I've been doing a course and we did something on group dynamics, and I think it was something called spiral dynamics, but talking about how you can be trying to do something collaboratively, but you've still maybe got the mindset of a different way of using power and things. So yeah, that's quite interesting too.
Anyone else? Huge round of applause, please.